Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Your Inner Spark. I'm your host, Lana, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that you guys know I am the most passionate about: nervous system regulation. Joining us today is Courtney Beyer, a yoga instructor and occupational therapist who is on a mission to help others feel grounded and regulated in their bodies to feel more connected and safe. So, without further ado, welcome, Courtney. Thank you for sitting here and having this conversation with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy and excited to be here.
So, first question I ask everybody is just when was the first time you felt your inner spark? And inner spark could be your inner spirit, that inner guide that you felt like was nudging you on the path that you're on now.
Yes. I would say, looking back throughout my life, there were definitely times where I felt so aligned on my path. I felt in my purpose. I felt like, things were going well, but I really feel like my inner spark really came alive when I was in my mid 20s. I had just gotten out of a long term relationship and I had moved to Chicago for a new job. And I really just felt as though I was coming into myself. I was finding home in my body. And I really noticed that, I had an amazing group of friends, but I noticed that there was something so much more. Like I wasn't interested in going out to the bars, drinking, and that being like the only method of socializing. And I really found myself, in nature and being outside and making like so much more meaningful connections and really just finding time to like ground and be present. And it was just like so much more than kind of like the typical social life of going out and getting drunk. And so I just found my inner spark when I grounded myself and found a rhythm with my nervous system. And it's really interesting because during this time, I was actually going through a really hard situation. My dad was diagnosed with cancer, and I was kind of deciding if I wanted to leave a job. And so there was still like a lot happening in my life where maybe I would have felt ungrounded, but I really learned to tune into myself, regulate my nervous system and just feel so calm amidst the ups and downs of life, amidst like the unknowns of my dad's diagnosis. And that is really where I felt like my inner spark fully came alive, because I realized, life doesn't have to be this perfect, rainbows and sunshine all of the time. It's normal for things to be up and down, for things to be maybe unknown or feel really ungrounded. And it was in that moment where I moved to San Diego and I got a different job and I started my own practice as well, and really brought this education of nervous system regulation to the world. And that's really where I felt like my inner spark started to shine.
That's beautiful. And there's so many things in your story that I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so many parallels because a year and a half ago, I went through a major life change, going through a really big breakup and just landing on my feet and being like, how did I end up here? What led me to this spot in my life? And um, that was when I really started diving into healing my body, really diving into what's sitting within my body, because I'd been in therapy for years. I've been doing talk therapy. I took care, I worked out, I fed myself well. I was doing a lot of things that felt healthy, but I still didn't feel in any way grounded in my body. I still felt just very out of touch with my body. And so I know my audience that has been following my journey attest to the fact that they've watched me. Like now I spend copious amounts of time in nature every single day. My whole reality has shifted. I've given up drinking, just a lot. So a lot of the things you're saying feel like there's so many parallels. And for me, I just really started doing my own research on nervous system regulation and healing. I think the idea was sparked within me from my therapist, right? She was started talking to me about nervous system regulation. Then I just started nerding out and diving all in. And now I feel like every single thing in my life comes back to my nervous system, right? And I truly believe, exactly as you said, it's not that you get to a spot where you never have upsets and you don't have to go through the ups and downs of life. It's just about learning how to stay regulated and self-soothe as you navigate those everything that life throws at you. So I'm curious for you, when you were going through that transformation in your 20s, did you just start, was it something you were learning through school, or your curiosity around your nervous system, was it something that just came to you on your own? How did you get into it?
Yeah, definitely. And definitely going back to what you said, when you go through these really big life events, whether it's a breakup or you're grieving the loss of a loved one, or just grieving the loss of the idea of how your life, air quotes, should have been. And it's tempting to want to just disconnect from yourself, right? It's really tempting to, yeah, go and socialize too much to the point where you're just like burnt out or distract yourself with working. And when I was going through this, I had already spent years of education, years of getting my master's degree in occupational therapy, practicing OT for several years. And it's really interesting, but I started to just use everything that I learned on myself. And it was time for me to kind of come inward and actually use everything that I had learned on myself. And I really became very curious about, like, even deeper curious about the nervous system. And I fell in love with polyvagal theory, which is a beautiful framework that is identifies a third nervous system response. And with studying polyvagal theory, I really just applied that to myself. And it was just a really amazing way to just practice everything on me and, yeah, kind of just tune into my own body.
Can you expand more on the polyvagal theory? Just because I've never
Yes.
heard that.
So, polyvagal theory is a really interesting explanation of the nervous system and how it responds. So, going back to what essentially the nervous system is, many of us, we learned about the nervous system in high school, in our anatomy and physiology class, or college, maybe, or we just learned about it on Instagram. But our nervous system is essentially our body's way of how we move about the world. It controls our thoughts, it controls our breathing, our heart rate, it controls how we're moving throughout the world. And any sort of trauma impacts our nervous system and how we're able to show up. It impacts our posture, it impacts our thoughts and feelings about ourselves, and it impacts our body's way of processing emotions. And polyvagal theory is definitely super interesting because it offers a third response pattern. So, the traditional view of the nervous system is you have, your fight or flight response, the sympathetic response pattern. So that's, when you feel all worked up about something and you feel like you just have to like run away, or, you're getting attacked by a bear and you're needing to defend yourself. And then it has the parasympathetic response, which is the rest and digest mode. That's when you're feeling calm, you're feeling grounded, you feel like you can have a conversation with somebody for hours and you just feel really good and aligned in your life. And the polyvagal theory offers that third response, and that is going to be the freeze or fawn response. And this is super helpful because I think a lot of people resonate with that, right? Where they feel as though when they're triggered or traumatized, they kind of shut down and they freeze and they want to just numb out. And so it just offers a really unique perspective about our bodies, and how sometimes when we respond to trauma, it's not always this like fleeing, fighting, defending yourself thing. It's also like sitting on the couch after a long week of, go, 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 and like kind of numbing yourself out by scrolling on social media, or, binging on Netflix, or just kind of numbing out of your life.
And I think that's so important to talk about because I think it is just very commonly you have the fight and flight, you have the rest digest. And even when I did an episode a few weeks ago, you guys heard me talk about the fact that, okay, there's this third response that I need to do more research on because I'm glad you guys are hearing this from somebody who has education on this, because you guys know I've just been self-educating. But so when I look at my life and I look at the way that I respond to triggers, it's always been this freeze mechanism. I call it a turtle shell. I physically can feel like this turtle shell engage. And I think I spent most of my life with that turtle shell just very heavily engaged. And on one of my Spark Notes episodes a few weeks back, I was talking about I'm dating somebody new, and it's the first time I'm navigating dating now that I've done a lot of work on myself and really having to identify my triggers and my response patterns. Because in the past, in dating, I would just shut down and never, the turtle shell would never be lifted. And I was telling you guys, I physically could feel like my turtle shell engage, but I didn't even liken it to the fact that it's this. I mean, I knew it was a nervous system response, but I didn't have the terminology to be able to identify that's what was taking place. And even when it comes to traumatic events, so I've talked a lot on my podcast about sexual trauma. And I think sometimes as women, or anybody, not just women, anybody that's experienced this, we're in we're in these situations and that are uncomfortable for us. And instead of fighting or fleeing, which we would think might be the response, we totally just shut down. We freeze. We can't even sometimes even speak words, even though we want to. And then I think sometimes there's so much shame and guilt around, oh my gosh, well, I didn't say no. I didn't walk away. I didn't fight or flight. And what does that say about me? And I think it's so like having the knowledge around the way that our nervous system is responding to triggers and traumas is so important, because it allows us to have compassion for ourselves if that was our response, if our response was just a shutdown. Or it could just be like you said, you had a stressful week at work and you have tasks you need to do and you're just stuck on the couch and you can't get up. And I think when that's taking place for us, a lot of time we're like, oh, we're so lazy, and then we have all this negative self-talk, and it just perpetuates the problem in the state that we're in, rather than just understanding, no, this is just a physiological response within my body. And once you have that understanding, you can work with your body better, show yourself grace, show yourself compassion. And ultimately, that's the only way that you create change and you heal, is to love yourself through that process. So thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that with us.
Yeah. And really, the freeze response is the most misunderstood nervous system response pattern. And it can often be seen as, oh my goodness, like this person is lazy, or this person has no drive, or, if only they did XYZ, they would perform better or accomplish their goals or something of that nature. And it can be very
Mhm.
easy to label a person that's kind of struggling through the freeze response, when really it's just the nervous system is so overstimulated, overwhelmed, and that response pattern is to just kind of isolate, numb, and like what you said, it feels like you have a turtle shell on, you feel heavy and disassociated, maybe even. And so, we really can give ourselves and empower ourselves. And like what you said, give ourselves so much grace and compassion through that time, just as you would somebody who was in the fight or flight response, somebody that was fighting their way through. And, you're like, take a deep breath. We can lend
Mhm.
ourselves that same compassion when we're moving through that frozen and stuck state.
I love that. So I want to kind of go back, take a step back a little bit. And if you had somebody come to you, right, and they hadn't been on Instagram, they hadn't done, like they hadn't seen any of the buzzwords, or maybe they've seen some of the buzzwords and they're just curious, what would you tell, like, what would be the basic overview? How would you explain to somebody the role that the nervous system plays, and just the importance of understanding it, just like big picture, because I think sometimes we dive into these specific topics and people are missing kind of just that bigger picture explanation.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, it's really important to understand that your nervous system is always fluctuating. So, if you're kind of wondering, I talked about those three response patterns earlier. Your nervous system is always fluctuating, ebbing and flowing between one of those three response patterns. And I think that's a common misconception, is people think, oh, I'm, either in one or the other, or maybe not at all, or something like that. But you're always circulating, and, in polyvagal theory, we call it moving up and down your autonomic ladder. your nervous system ladder. And you can even be in a blended state of two responses. And so it's just important to know that this is just your body's way of flowing through life and fluctuating through stressful moments. And it's important to just kind of understand that your body is just always somewhere through those three response patterns, whether or not you feel like you're really grounded and feel like you're, able to socially connect with others, or you're feeling like you're just on the go, 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 and like you can't slow down, or you're in that more stuck, frozen state. It's important to just be aware that your body is dealing and moving with stress in that way. And another thing that I like to start off with when you're kind of just beginning to dive into your nervous system is understanding that your nervous system communicates to you through sensations. And that is really the gateway into becoming curious about your nervous system response, is getting curious about sensations. And that can be, something like feeling really hot or flushed when your boss is giving you a report back, or getting a tingly sensation in your stomach when you're first getting to know somebody and you're first starting to date somebody. It can be when you're trying to communicate your true feelings, a closed sensation in your jaw, maybe a tightness sensation in your shoulders. And these sensations are all communicating to you how exactly your body is moving and navigating through those response patterns in your nervous system. And the ultimate goal of nervous system regulation is finding a sense of safety while moving and ebbing and flowing through those three response patterns. And now safety is more of that feeling of calm and grounded, but also feeling like, hey, I can navigate and I can feel calm and grounded even when my throat feels tight while I'm trying to communicate my feelings to the person I'm dating. Or I can stay safe while speaking up to my boss who maybe is making some comments that make me feel triggered. And so, yeah, when it comes to learning how to regulate your nervous system, it's all about getting curious about sensation and just getting curious about safety and what exactly safety means to you personally.
I think that's super important. I think I very frequently get asked, okay, so I think a lot of us spend so much of our time or so much of our life completely disconnected from our bodies. I know I did. I think my nervous system has been dysregulated from the time that I was a child because I was raised in an eggshell environment with a lot of violence in my home. And then I just never worked through these things. And I had other traumas happen later in my life. And it wasn't until the last year and a half that I think I actually started to even be in touch with my body in any capacity, right? I was just so numb to everything, emotionally, physically. So if you had met somebody like me a year and a half ago who was like completely out of touch with myself, just like a robot, basically, like this hard exterior, turtle shell. And if you looked at my life from the outside looking in, I was successful. I was doing all the things, but I was actually feeling quite miserable and I didn't feel safe in my body at all. If you had met somebody like me who's like, sensations, I don't feel anything, I'm just like, where would you even begin for those people that are like, I'm curious, but I don't even know where to start because I feel so out of touch with myself.
Ah, yeah, Lana, that is such a good point because it's so common. So many people are disconnected from themselves. And that's really truly why I started my own practice, is because years of working in the traditional healthcare system, witnessing what a lifetime of being disconnected from yourself ultimately does to your body. And it creates, disease, inflammation, chronic pain, just so many things. And then when you're disconnected from yourself, you don't even really notice what's going on in your body. And so that's really why I became so passionate about sharing this work with others. But yeah, when you are just beginning to get into your body, sensations can be a lot to face, because that's why we choose to stay so disconnected from ourselves, is because those sensations are uncomfortable to sit with. And so it's so much easier to distract by
Mhm.
overworking, like we said, very
Over
successful because
exercising.
yeah, exercising, just constant distraction, and then on the other side, numbing and shutting down. And so I always love to start with very simple body-based practices. And that's what my practice is all about, is coming back to the body. And we do that, on a, I call it titration. So on a scale, just slowly starting to get people, women, back into their bodies. And that can just simply be a 10 minutes of breathing and just taking deep breaths and just allowing yourself to just tap into some subtle sensations and just kind of describing them to yourself. It doesn't have to be like a 3 hour,
Mhm.
meditation or just like some big thing. It can really just be slowly starting to let those sensations come in, because if you go too much, it's kind of like trying to take a sip of water from a fire hose. And so you want to slowly allow those sensations to trickle in and get comfortable with being with them. And for some people, we can move through that pretty quickly. For others, it's a very slow process because we don't want to overwhelm the nervous system and flood the body with just, too much sensation, but going slow. And even like what you said, and I know you love, spending time in nature, just even taking some time to slowly walk through nature and just taking in some sights and sounds and smells can also be really helpful too.
Yeah, I think something I started doing at the beginning of my own journey, it's something I heard on a podcast, was to just check in with my senses. It's something I never did. I would move through life and I didn't pay attention to what I was smelling or what I was feeling. And that's why at the beginning of a lot of my podcast episodes, I'm like, okay, you guys, let's take a moment to check in with our bodies and check in with your senses. Like, actually genuinely feel, how does the chair beneath your butt feel? What do you smell? What do you hear? And I think it's, like you said, it doesn't have to be this complex thing where overnight you're going to, do this intense routine and everything's going to change. It's about these tiny little things each day that slowly accumulate over time and create big change in your body and the way that you feel in your body. So I love that you said that. Going back to like overworking, over exercising. So my background is I used to compete in bodybuilding, and then I did powerlifting, and I was a fitness coach, and I was just like heavily into that world. I was a ride or die for a while. Developed a full blown eating disorder in the process, and just, it was never healthy for me. It was never healthy for me. Um, and I realized that I was living the epitome of health, or what I thought was health, right? Which I think there's a difference between fitness and health. Um, but when I first started on my health journey, I went on Instagram and it was like these shredded competitors. And I'm like, oh, that's what I need to do. And as I've really started to heal and come home to my body, I realized that chronic over exercising, doing intensive cardio, and under eating specifically was keeping my body very dysregulated. And I think I listened to a podcast that really changed everything for me. And they were talking about when you have a past or history of trauma, and if it's still sitting in your body, you have to take a more gentle approach. You have to take a trauma focused approach to your exercise and fitness routine. That has been life changing for me. So now I lift maybe 2 to 3 days a week. I honor my body if she's not wanting me to push weight. I walk. I don't do any like high intensity, the jumping around, the hit cardio. And I've never felt better in my body. And I've my entire, not that this matters, but my physique has completely changed to the what I was aspiring for all along, but just like, struggling in the process to get there. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on just exercising in general, because I think sometimes we think it can be so healthy, but I think there's an extreme. I think there's a boundary that we need to make sure we're not going past, especially if we are trauma survivors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And just as you said, sometimes that exercise, because it's so good for us, right? It increases our blood flow. It gets all the blood flowing to our muscles, our tissues, our brain. It helps us feel so good because of those endorphins. It increases our respirations and gets oxygen flowing through our bodies. And that can feel so good. And it is so good for ourselves. But it then can also serve as another way to distract ourselves from what's happening within. And just as you mentioned, it's a whole host of things. We can find ourselves comparing ourselves to others on social media. There's so much information out there about, workout plans, all of that. But sometimes the medicine and the best exercise is learning how to slow down and do more forms of exercise that are a little bit gentler on, or a lot of bit gentler on the body. And that can help us also not only exercise where we're discharging some emotions, we're still moving the body, letting those emotions run through our tissues, run through our bodies, and we're kind of discharging, expelling some emotions. But also at the same time, we are connecting our mind to our body. And we do that in those really slow movements like walking or Pilates, maybe a slower form of yoga, not like the fast vinyasa style, but more of like a slower yin style yoga. And that can help us just get even more grounded into ourselves. And also it helps, reduce inflammation and cortisol and all of that, and can help us get back into our bodies. Because sometimes what happens, I think, like what you mentioned, when you're doing too much intense exercise, that can keep us in a fight or flight loop and we never just slow down. But when we get into more of that intentional exercise that our body is actually really craving, we can do more of that. And then it is so interesting how when you do that, like aesthetically, you're like, oh my goodness, this is actually how I kind of aesthetically desired to be, because I feel the way that I want to feel internally. And that's showing on the outside.
Absolutely. And I think too, I mean, I when I was like deep in that world, I was rest, like sleep, what was that? You know what I mean? So there was like a combination of things. I would get up and go train even if I had slept 4 hours, and I would train 6 to 7 days a week. And then I remember when I first started seeing my therapist, I was like, okay, I have anxiety every single day. And she was like, that's your internal fire alarm telling you something needs attention. And just simply changing or setting a commitment that I have to sleep. Like sleep is more of a priority than the gym. Even when I was still in the midst of like living an imbalanced life, that alone made such a big impact on just the way that I felt. So yeah, I love that feedback just because I'm like, I don't know all the science behind this, but I'm telling you guys, I feel different. Like I
Yeah.
feel completely different. And I think you should, if you are still in that world, I mean, everybody has their own individual story and whatnot. But if you're still that like I have to train 6 to 7 days a week and it be this, balls to the wall workout every single time and you're feeling crappy, maybe just slow down. And I know that there's other people out there like me that's like rest, slow down, like what? No, because we've been like pedal to the floor our entire life. And so slowing down is actually a new skill you have to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is, because sometimes I think we also think more is better. Like if I just do
Mhm.
more and more, it'll help me achieve my goals. But it's such a balance when it comes to our bodies, especially if we're in that fight or flight loop, that can really increase inflammation. And like what I also mentioned, cortisol just gets pumped in your body. And when you have too much cortisol and your body is thinking, oh my goodness, I actually don't feel safe letting go of this weight because I feel like I'm preparing to fight for a battle. Like your body is getting the signal when you work out 6 days, 7 days a week that you must be, preparing for some sort of battle or bear attack. So your body just is like, I'm going to hold on to all this weight because apparently we need it for later.
I know that's so true. Even just with what I'm navigating right now, like recently was laid off. I was still working a corporate job on top of doing my podcast. And my goal was by the end of the year was to just like take the plunge into entrepreneurship. But I've had so much fear around taking the leap. And then my hand was forced. So it's been a beautiful blessing. But I'm just had this realization yesterday where I was like, I just can't move at the speed that I normally do right now because I'm navigating so much change on top of that. Like, this keeps falling over. I am getting ready to leave in 2 months and leave behind my hometown, my family, my friends, everything that I know, my home. Just like my mom moved into my house. So I'm now roommates with my mom until I leave because she's going to live in my home when I'm gone. And so a lot of change has taken place over the last week or two. And I am just recognizing, okay, I have to slow down right now. Like I'm so used to responding to things in my life with, okay, here's my plan of action, right? And that's how I've navigated a lot of things in my life. And it's allowed me to get to a good spot at the age that I'm at. But I'm like, okay, now I have a different understanding of my body for me to navigate through this seamlessly or as seamlessly as possible, because seamlessly is not, life isn't perfect. I have to make sure I'm prioritizing rest and regulation of my nervous system. And I've been sleeping way more, resting way more, taking way more baths, doing more yoga, prioritizing breath work every day. And I'm like, I know that this is still going to be a hard process, but it's like, it's building trust that, okay, I can navigate the ups and downs and whatever comes my way. So yes, learning to slow down. I think for a lot of us, especially if you're a type A personality, it's like a brand new skill you have to learn. And it's really hard. It's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And your nervous system, it takes time for your nervous system to catch up with all of the changes. And it
Mm.
feels, that's what your body is kind of craving, that slowing down, that keeping things simple, maybe not checking everything off as much, but it's giving your nervous system that time to regulate itself through all of these changes. And, I think that's so common that sometimes when we do go through a lot of changes, we get surprised that our body is so tired and desires so much more rest. But it really is our body's way of recalibrating and expanding a little bit as well too. When we go through all those changes, it just takes time for things to expand and feel regulated. So
Absolutely.
understandable.
So you posted this morning on Instagram talking about anxious attachment and nervous system. And I'm like, okay, this is a topic I could talk about for hours because I am somebody who, in my past relationships, had very strong anxious attachment tendencies, like from the get go, right? As soon as I would decide that I like somebody, it was like that anxious attachment would form. And it really is what kept me in relationships that I didn't serve me for way longer than I wanted to be there, because I just physically felt this anxiety around leaving them or losing them. And I have been single for a year and a half and I haven't really dated. So like I said, I'm just re-entering the dating scene. And I think I took so long to do that because I had this giant fear. The worst fear for me was getting back into another relationship and having an anxious attachment to somebody again, because I don't think there's a worse feeling in the world. I truly don't. And then as I've been going, through the self-discovery process of, trying to learn about my nervous system and everything, I'm like, oh, I think my anxious attachment all came back to my nervous system being dysregulated and not feeling safe. And I haven't really explored that much more than just really starting to understand that, like, okay, everything I think comes back to this dysregulation in my body, not feeling safe in my body. So I want you to expand upon that, because I know there are other anxious attached girlies out there. And I don't think it's a permanent label. I think it's a tendency. And I think we have the ability to shift that. And it's important to remember that. But yeah, let's dive into that because it's, impacts even our relationships. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I started diving into this in my practice a lot more because I noticed that every woman that was coming to me struggled through this. And it was a very, very common theme. And no surprise here, but it's something that I worked through and navigated in my own life as well, and tend to lean more towards an anxious attachment style as well. So it all comes full circle, right? So yeah, it's when you are or you identify with having an anxious attachment style, there tends to be that discomfort with space between you and either the person that you're dating or interested in. I guide a lot of women that are struggle with this in their marriages too, or even sometimes with their coworkers or their relationships to work as well. And so it can kind of come in all sorts of different relationships, but there tends to be that discomfort when there's space. And the anxious person or person that identifies with anxious attachment wants to constantly lean towards that person that they're dating because they don't want that space between them. And it just kind of tends to be a cycle because when you are anxiously attached, you tend to continue to attract avoidant partners. So, partners who kind of have the opposite, where they need space, and it becomes that full cycle. And that doesn't mean that you can never be with somebody who's a little bit more avoidant, but it's all about learning to find safety with that space. And uncovering why you feel that lack of safety when there is space and that discomfort when there is space. And that space can be in multiple different forms. It can be like, okay, you both are at work for the day. So obviously there's going to be some space and you're wondering why you're not getting text messages, in the morning and the afternoon. Or it can be maybe after heated discussion where some healthy space is very necessary. And, so you take some space and the anxious person is like, oh my goodness, I'm very uncomfortable with the space. I need reassurance. And so typically the anxious person desires that reassurance when there is space. And so I love working with women who feel anxious in their relationships because we really identify the root cause of why there's this anxious feeling. Is it because there were unmet needs in childhood? So some inner child healing needs to happen. Or were there, different traumas that happened in childhood or adulthood that made it so there was that lack of safety with space? Is there an abandonment wound where maybe there was a time where you were just felt like you were left on your own with no explanation? And there can be so many different reasons, but we really explore the root cause of the anxieties. And then we again get back into the body, learn all about how to feel, how to regulate yourself when you're getting really anxious and there's all those uncomfortable sensations when there's space in the relationship, and learning the tools to regulate yourself so that you can comfort yourself during those times of discomfort. And therefore, that will help the relationship improve and move at a more natural pace because there's not that like grasping of, oh my goodness, like, can you reassure me? Or, can you like just fill in that space? And I always, want to reiterate that it is possible to tell the person that you're dating, like, hey, I am a little bit more on the anxious side. I do benefit from reassurance. So, it is helpful to get that reassurance, but at the same time, let them know, like, this is something I am working on and something that I am learning how to soothe myself during these times so that there is kind of that accountability that you are, working on yourself and at the same time need a little bit extra reassurance.
I love that. I think it's so important to remember that it's okay to communicate your needs if you require or if you feel better with a little bit more communication or more consistent communication. I think sometimes we're like, well, we don't want anybody to know that we're this way because it makes us feel damaged or whatnot. So remember that there's no shame in it. But yeah, so I thought that was beautiful. If you are somebody, so right now I just had a conversation yesterday evening with a girlfriend. We have, she also has struggled with anxious attachment in the past. And she started dating somebody new and she's been on the fence about him. And now all of a sudden she's decided, okay, I'm interested in this person. And now she's analyzing the texts and how frequently he texts. And I'm like, okay, just, so we're like walking through that. And I'm like, oh, I know exactly. I've been there so many times. I know when that shift takes place. But if you are brand new in a relationship or in any relationship and you feel that anxiousness within you arise and you're wanting to close that gap or that space between somebody, what would be some tools somebody could use to help self-soothe themselves like in that moment when those feelings do arise?
Yeah. Yeah. Cause there can be that graspiness and desire to control situations because of those anxieties that is coming up, and it's that really difficult sensations to feel with. So there can be that desire to want to like grasp and be like, okay, like I'm going to grasp on and maybe control, like see what, analyze every little thing that they're saying and overthink things. And really, that's just a sign that we're stuck up in our heads and that we're just kind of in a thought loop that's not really serving us. And I always encourage women to take that as a sign to come back into their bodies and take care of their own physical and emotional needs. Sometimes when we're really wrapped up in a situation, we forget to take care of ourselves and we forget to do things like cook a nourishing meal, maybe even get some exercise, go for a walk, and do anything that helps you move from your head and into your body. And that can be doing a nice, grounded, calming, body based practice, or doing an activity like cooking, or if you like have a hobby, like maybe you like to go to ceramics class, or maybe you like to do horseback riding, or you like to, go for runs, things like that. Because often when we're stuck up in our mind, we forget to do those things that we love to do. And also, we kind of forget to take care of our own needs. And so it's really a beautiful invitation to see, how much more can I lean back into myself and do things for me that feel really good. And instead of focusing so much on this person and when are they going to respond and what are they saying and what does this all mean, and just taking it as an invitation to lean back. And as I always tell women in my practice, like as soon as you feel yourself leaning back, lean back even more, and then lean back even more. And sometimes it can feel really hard at first and very unnatural, and that is okay. It's okay if in the lean back at first it feels very you still are like, oh, but I still want to like analyze, or I still am like desiring a text message back, or I still just need, it is okay to have those sensations coming up. Because for some folks that, don't necessarily heal their anxious attachment, sometimes there's never really anything that's going to satisfy that like itch that they're looking for. It's really what's going to satisfy that is coming back to your body and taking care of yourself. And it is a practice, and it's okay if it doesn't feel great right away, and to just lean into it and continue to take care of your physical and emotional needs.
I think that's so important. And I think that will be useful for so many people because I think a lot of us struggle with those tendencies big time. But like I said before, there's so much hope that you can heal those, or like those tendencies can shift, right? And I think that the more you do this work, the more that you get into your body, regardless of your relationships, the more that you build trust within yourself. And when you feel that safety and trust within yourself, it it's like has a ripple effect, so it does impact the way that you show up in relationships big time. But yeah, I love that topic just because I think it impacts us way more than we even realize. And when we get into relationships, and if we do form that anxious attachment, then we're no longer operating from a place of like what's best for us. It's just about soothing that anxiety that's within us. And yeah, then usually you're not making choices that are most in alignment with what's for your best self. So if somebody's at home listening right now and they're like, okay, this is all very interesting. I've been curious about my nervous system healing. I'm going to start paying attention to just getting into my body more, paying attention to sensations. What other practical tools would you provide to somebody who is just curious about all of this and wanting to build trust and safety within their body? Where would you begin if you were just at home, kind of, listening to this and wanting to get started?
Yeah, I would say I would start also just getting curious about what do you do and what does your body do when you are stressed out or in a conflict. And I would just start to get curious about kind of what do you do? So, do you tend to shut out and like shut everything out and want to just like drive away? Like, what are your thoughts telling you? Like, do you want to like get in the car and drive away? Do you want to just like leave everything? Or do you want to like bury yourself under your covers? Or do you want to like take some deep breaths? I would start getting curious about what does stress do to your body, and that can be something that's a really good like journal question about uncovering more about your own nervous system is getting curious about that. And you can go as broad or as deep as you are able to, and describe what sensations come alive within during those times. And the more that we can start to understand what we do when we are feeling stressed, the more we can start to gain awareness of where our bodies start to want to take us, and we can gain some awareness of like our traumas and how we are able to then soothe ourselves. And I would say that that's a really good place to start and to kind of uncover more information about your nervous system. And yeah, I think that's a beautiful place to begin. And yeah, I think also kind of getting curious about where do you feel most at peace? Like, do you feel most at peace when you're on a walk in nature or when you're spending time with your family? Are you with people? Are you alone? And start to do those things that make you feel regulated. Is it reading a book? Is it cooking a nourishing meal for yourself or your loved ones? And just continuing to do more of those activities that bring you into your body and also feel more regulated. And then, of course, it's really helpful. I work with people privately as well, and I have online courses to help get, deeper into that. But if you want to understand, like, well, why, when I'm stressed out, do I do XYZ? That can be super helpful to start to, work with somebody that is well versed in this topic and can be very helpful on your healing journey as well.
I love the statement, be curious. I think so much of healing just comes down to being curious, being curious. Why am I feeling this? Why am I responding this way? Just be curious about yourself from a judgment free place. So, thank you so much for all of this. I feel like we could talk for 3 more hours because I have so many questions for you. But thank you for sharing your knowledge with everyone today. And I just want to kind of open the floor to you so you can let everybody know where they can find you, what you're working on. If people want to learn more from you, where do they go?
Yeah, definitely. I know I feel like I could talk for days about all of this. It's so fascinating. Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. I love sharing a lot. I share a lot of educational tools about nervous system regulation and anxious attachment. And my Instagram handles at her.body.wisdom. And I also have a workbook that can be really helpful if you're just wanting to get curious and dive a little bit deeper into your own unique nervous system. And I also work one on one with clients and take a really personalized approach to mapping out your whole nervous system and learning ways that you can really tend to your own physical and emotional body. And yeah, and I also have an online course that is really helpful if you're looking to heal your anxious attachment style as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Courtney. I know everybody is going to love this and take so much useful information from this.